June 29th, a special date in basketball history. Today, we celebrate the birthday of Joe Johnson, the man they call ISO Joe. He wasn't the loudest, he wasn't the flashiest, but when the clock was ticking down, he was the one you gave the ball to. Who could forget that moment, the ankle-breaking crossover that sent his defender crashing to the floor, followed by a smooth jumper that barely touched the rim? On his birthday, let's look back at the journey of a quiet assassin, a true master of isolation basketball. Joe Marcus Johnson was born on June 29, 1981, in Little Rock, Arkansas, a place far removed from the spotlight of NBA arenas. Raised by a single mother, Diane Johnson, who worked as a state healthcare worker, Joe's early life was modest but filled with discipline and quiet determination. From an early age, basketball was more than just a game for Joe. It was his escape, his focus, and his calling. He spent countless hours in neighborhood gyms and on blacktop courts, where he developed the smooth, controlled style that would later define his career. By the time he reached Little Rock Central High School, Joe was already making waves as one of the most promising young athletes in Arkansas. Standing 6'7" with a silky jumper and a high basketball IQ, he quickly became a local legend. College scouts were soon lining up. He chose to stay close to home, enrolling at the University of Arkansas. In just 2 seasons with the Razorbacks, Joe showcased his versatility, averaging over 16 points per game, handling the ball like a guard and rebounding like a forward. His calm demeanor and clutch shot-making ability made him stand out in the Southeastern Conference. NBA teams took notice. In the 2001 NBA Draft, Joe Johnson was selected 10th overall by the Boston Celtics. He had made it from the quiet streets of Little Rock to the bright lights of the NBA. But even then, Joe didn't celebrate loudly. He didn't brag. He just got to work. Little did the world know this quiet kid from Arkansas was about to become one of the most dependable and ice-cold scorers of his generation, a player who would earn the respect of teammates, coaches, and fans, not with words, but with buckets. Joe Johnson's NBA career began in 2001 when he was drafted 10th overall by the Boston Celtics. At just 20 years old, Joe entered a historic franchise with high expectations. But the NBA moves fast, and for a quiet rookie trying to find his rhythm, the spotlight can be unforgiving. His early months in Boston were a whirlwind. The team was stacked with veterans, and Joe's minutes were inconsistent. Still, he showed flashes, smooth jumpers, calm under pressure, and an isolation game that seemed years ahead of his age. But the Celtics were chasing playoff success, and in a mid-season trade, Johnson was shipped to the Phoenix Suns. It turned out to be a blessing in disguise. In Phoenix, Johnson found space to grow. Under coach Mike D'Antoni's fast-paced system and alongside young stars like Amari Stoudemire and Sean Marion, Joe began to bloom. By the 2004-2005 season, playing with Steve Nash, he had become a deadly spot-up shooter and secondary ball handler, the perfect complement to Nash's wizardry. He averaged over 17 points per game, shot nearly 48% from 3, and played a major role in helping the Suns become one of the league's most explosive offenses. But something was missing for Joe. He didn't just want to fit in, he wanted to lead. In the summer of 2005, Joe declined a 5-year extension from Phoenix, instead choosing to sign with the Atlanta Hawks via a sign and trade. Critics questioned his decision, leaving a championship contender for a rebuilding team. But Joe wasn't chasing rings. He was chasing responsibility. In Atlanta, he would get what he wanted: the ball, the minutes, and the weight of carrying a franchise. Joe Johnson was no longer just a role player. He was becoming a star, and soon the basketball world would recognize him not just for his numbers, but for the calm, cold-blooded way he delivered them. When Joe Johnson arrived in Atlanta in 2005, the Hawks were far from playoff contention. But that didn't intimidate him. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, he was consistent, methodical, and deadly when the game slowed down. Over the next 7 seasons, Johnson transformed both himself and the Atlanta Hawks. He averaged over 20 points per game for 5 straight seasons, becoming the team's offensive anchor. His style of play earned him a new nickname across the league, ISO Joe. In a league filled with high-flying dunks and fast-paced transitions, Joe's game was a throwback. He thrived in isolation one-on-one matchups where the game came down to skill footwork and ice in your veins. Whether it was a fadeaway, a step back, or a pull-up three, Johnson made scoring in the toughest situations look easy. From 2007 to 2012, he was selected to the NBA All-Star Game 6 times, representing Atlanta with pride. Under his leadership, the Hawks went from a forgotten franchise to a consistent playoff team. Fans in Atlanta began to believe again, and Joe was the reason. But what truly made Johnson special wasn't just the points. It was the timing. Again and again in close games he delivered. Game winners, buzzer beaters, cold-blooded daggers that silenced crowds and stunned defenders. In 2010, Johnson signed a massive 6-year deal worth $119 million, one of the largest contracts in the league at the time. Critics questioned the price tag, but Joe never let the noise affect his game. He stayed true to who he was, a quiet killer with the ball in his hands when it mattered most. His time in Atlanta solidified his legacy. He wasn't chasing attention. He wasn't chasing highlights. He was chasing wins one isolation possession at a time. By 2012, Joe Johnson's time in Atlanta had run its course. The Hawks, looking to rebuild, traded him to the Brooklyn Nets, a team with big expectations and an even bigger spotlight. In Brooklyn, Joe wasn't just an all-star. He was a closer. Though no longer the lone star on his team, Johnson quickly proved he still had the clutch gene. In crunch time, few were more reliable. He hit multiple game-winning buzzer beaters in Brooklyn cold, quiet daggers that reminded fans why they called him ISO Joe. But as time passed, the league changed. The NBA was moving faster, becoming more reliant on pace and space. Johnson, now in his mid-30s, had to adapt. He took his talents to several teams, Miami Heat, Utah Jazz, and Houston Rockets, accepting smaller roles, but always contributing with veteran poise and leadership. In Utah, he became a guiding force for a young core. One of his finest moments came in the 2017 playoffs when he delivered yet another game winner, this time in the first round against the Clippers. Even as his minutes declined, his value never did. Coaches trusted him. Teammates leaned on him. But after 2018, the NBA moved on. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, Joe Johnson found himself without a team. Most players would have walked away. Joe didn't. Instead, he joined the Big Three League, a 3-on-3 competition featuring former pros, and dominated. In 2019, he led his team to the Championship One League MVP and reminded the world that his scoring touch was still elite. His performance earned him another shot in the NBA. In December 2021, nearly 20 years after his debut, Joe Johnson signed a 10-day contract with the Boston Celtics, the same team that had drafted him in 2001. At age 40, he suited up one more time and fittingly scored a basket. It was a full-circle moment. From rising star to seasoned vet, Joe Johnson had never quit. He just kept playing his way. Joe Johnson never won an NBA championship. He was never the league MVP, never led the league in scoring, and rarely made headlines off the court. But ask any true basketball fan, and they'll tell you Joe Johnson was different. He wasn't built for hype. He was built for moments. Across 17 NBA seasons, Johnson scored over 20,000 career points, joining a short list of elite scorers in league history. He played for 7 NBA teams, made 7 All-Star appearances, and delivered countless clutch shots that defined games and careers. His signature calm, isolation-heavy game made him a nightmare to guard when the stakes were highest. But more than the numbers, it was how he played with silence, poise, and ice in his veins. No drama, no spotlight chasing, just pure professional basketball. Teammates respected him, coaches trusted him, fans admired him. Off the court, Johnson remained humble and grounded, often returning to Little Rock, Arkansas to support youth programs and give back to his community. He never forgot where he came from and never lost the work ethic that got him to the league in the first place. Even in retirement, his influence lingers. Younger players still study his footwork, fans still share videos of his game winners, and the nickname ISO Joe has become a badge of honor, a symbol of mastery in the art of one-on-one basketball. In an era of flashy highlights and constant noise, Joe Johnson's greatness was quiet but undeniable. He proved that you don't need to yell to be heard. You don't need to be famous to be feared. And you don't need rings to be respected. So today on his birthday, we don't just celebrate the points or the buzzer beaters. We celebrate a man who played the game his way with grace, grit, and a jumper that never let him down. Joe Johnson didn't chase the spotlight. He became the moment.